Please, just let us stay for the night," the mother pleaded, and the widower hour stood still, surprising everyone, when Samuel, a man whose heart had been closed off by grief, heard a sob coming from his storage room. He found a woman and a child trembling in the rain. The mother's desperate plea struck him like a ghost. It was the same rain, the same anguished look from the night his own wife had died. His instinct was to close the door, just as he had done with Theirest of the world, but in a single moment he broke his own vow of solitude and whispered, "Come in." The promise was to stay just for the night, but what happens when the night ends? What began as a simple act of mercy would become a shared life that challenged the judgment of an entire village and transformed that house of mourning into a new home. The day dawned gray, and the air still carried the strong smell of the previous night's rain. The rooster crowed late, as if it too had lost sleep during the storm. Samuel woke up early as he had since Amina had gone. He got up with the care of someone who doesn't want to wake memories. He went to the kitchen and lit the fire. While the kettle heated, he heard a soft murmur coming from the living room. Rosa was there sitting on the floor, combing little Nala's hair with her fingers since she no longer had a comb. The two of them seemed out of time. A mother trying to hide her exhaustion and a daughter still sleepy playing at smiling. Samuel stood silently in the doorway for a moment, watching. It was a simple scene, but there was a dignity in it that touched him deeply. He cleared his throat so he wouldn't seem too curious and said, "There's porridge on the stove. Help yourselves before it gets cold." Rosa stood up quickly, eyes lowered, and replied, "We don't want to be a bother, sir. We're just grateful for the shelter." Samuel, without looking at her, responded, "Being a bother is letting someone freeze to death. Eat." Those short, dry words were his way of saying they were safe. Rosa understood. She led Nala to the table and served the porridge with trembling hands. Nala ate slowly, eyes alert to everything, as if she still couldn't believe her luck. Samuel sat at the other end of the table, saying nothing. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was respect, the kind of silence that exists between people who have more wounds than stories to tell. After eating, Rosa thanked him again. She told him she came from the neighboring town where she worked as a maid in a big house. She said her employer had accused her of stealing a gold ring she'd never seen, and that she'd been thrown out in front of everyone, her daughter in her arms. Her voice faltered between one memory and another. "I don't know what will become of us, sir. I just wanted to spend the night somewhere where no one would tell us to leave." Samuel listened in silence. The sound of rain on the roof seemed to follow her every word. Deep down, he remembered the day he too was unfairly judged when Amina died, and the villagers said he hadn't taken proper care of his wife. Since then he had gone quiet to the world, but hearing that woman speak with such pain was like the past knocking at his door again. "What's your name?" he asked in a low voice. "Rosa, sir, and this is my daughter now." Old Samuel nodded thoughtful. "No other place to go. No, sir. Only God knows what will become of us now." For a moment, the name of God echoed deeply in Samuel's heart. It had been a long time since he'd heard someone say that name with faith, not bitterness. Rosa spoke like someone who still believes, even after losing everything. "You can stay until the rain passes," he said firmly. But without looking directly at her, Rosa thanked him again, and Nala, in a timid gesture, offered him a piece of bread. Samuel took it and gave a small smile, barely noticeable but sincere. The day went on slowly. Rosa washed their clothes and hung them on a makeshift clothesline. Nala played with a doll made of torn fabric. Samuel fixed the fence while watching from a distance that scene which, without him noticing, was bringing color back to his forgotten backyard. When the sun began to set, Rosa prepared dinner with the little she found: cassava, salt, and a handful of leaves. Samuel ate in silence and for the first time in years felt the taste of food accompanied by company. That night when the wind began to blow again, he didn't feel alone. The shelter he had offered those two was without knowing it. The same shelter life was beginning to give back to him. A simple gesture almost involuntary but already changing everything. Because sometimes by giving shelter to someone in need, we find what we didn't even know we'd lost: our own peace. Night fell once again over the village, bringing with it a damp wind that whispered through the branches of the cashew tree in the backyard. Inside the mud house, the fire crackled slowly, casting yellowish flickers on the old walls. Rosa sat near the hearth, mending a piece of clothing with borrowed thread. Nala slept, curled up in a blanket Samuel had taken from the chest of his late wife. The silence between them was thick, but carried something new, a kind of cautious trust. Daughter Samuel, sitting in the rocking chair, watched Rosa. So there was a delicacy in her movement, a calmness that hid exhaustion. He wanted to ask more, to understand what had brought her there, but feared seeming intrusive. Still, something inside him longed to listen. Speaking just to ease the weight of time, he said, "Seems like you've been through a lot." Rosa looked up. For a moment, the fire reflected in the tears she was holding back with effort. "You have no idea," she said softly, almost like a lament. "I worked 5 years in that house, took care of the ladies' kids, baked bread, washed clothes, tended the garden. I never lacked effort, but one lie, one wicked word, and I lost everything." Samuel remained silent. Rosa went on like someone who needed to speak just to breathe. "They said I stole Madam's ring. I swore I didn't, that I'd never touched their things, but no one listened. They called the neighbors. The boss shouted, and in the end they threw me out with the girl in my arms. It was humiliating. And the worst part wasn't the hunger. It was the way people looked at me that says you're worth nothing." Her words filled the air with an old weight, one Samuel knew all too well. He also knew what it was like to carry guilt without committing a crime. When Amina fell ill and died in childbirth, many in the village whispered, said he hadn't done enough, that it was God's punishment for something no one could name. Since then, he had shut his heart to the world, and the world in turn had forgotten him. "Not everyone who suffers is guilty," he murmured, eyes lost in the fire. Rosa looked at him closely, as if recognizing the same wound in another. "You've been wrong too, haven't you?" Samuel took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, and I learned that people judge what they don't understand. They judge so they don't have to look at their own misery." A dense silence settled between the two. Outside, the wind knocked against the window as if it wanted to join the conversation. Rosa wiped away a tear, disguising the gesture. "You think the world's ending when you're thrown away," she said. "But sometimes God closes a door just to show there's still ground ahead." Samuel stood up slowly and went to the shelf. He took a clay mug and filled it with hot coffee. He handed it to Rosa, saying nothing. She accepted it with both hands. Grateful. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. Two strangers bound by pain, offering each other what they still had. Humanity. He looked at her once more, and for a moment he saw something in her he hadn't seen in years. A small, stubborn light that insists on shining, even in misery. Maybe it was faith. Maybe courage. Maybe it was just life refusing to go out. Rosa noticed his gaze and looked down. "Sorry if I talk too much, sir." Samuel shook his head. Sometimes talking is the only way not to get lost. The conversation ended there, but the echo of the words remained. That night when Samuel went to bed, sleep took a while to come. The memory of Amina mixed with the image of Rosa holding her daughter. He realized that despite all the time that had passed, the pain was still alive. He had only learned to hide it beneath work and silence. Outside, the shy moon peeked through the clouds. Inside the house, the fire was dying out, but something within Samuel was reigniting. Slowly, he realized that fate with its harsh and quiet ways might have brought that woman and child to him for a reason. Because sometimes life doesn't give back what we've lost, but it offers another chance to love what's still left. The darkness that night felt thicker than the ones before. The wind blew again, but now its sound didn't bring fear, only memories. Inside the house, the fire burned low, and the smell of burning wood mingled with the scent of the porridge Rosa had made for her daughter before bedtime. Nala was lying on a blanket spread near the fireplace, her face peaceful, like someone who trusted in the shelter fate had finally granted her. Samuel, sitting in the rocking chair, watched the sleeping child. It was a calm, pure sleep, the kind only those who still believe in tomorrow can have. It had been a long time since he'd seen a child sleep in that house. Since Amina's death, the sound he heard most often was that of his own silence. Now that soft little breath filled the space with a tenderness that left him unsettled. Rosa, tired, adjusted the blanket over her daughter and sat beside the fire. The orange glow lit her face, revealing the traces of sleepless nights and years of struggle. Samuel looked at that woman and thought about how hard life could be on the good ones. How people so often mistake humility for weakness. The wall clock struck 9, but no one seemed sleepy. Rosa stared at the flames as if silently speaking with them. Samuel, trying to hide the emotion rising in his chest, asked, "When do you plan to continue your journey?" She thought for a moment before answering, "Tomorrow, if the weather holds. I don't want to be a burden to anyone." He shook his head, disapproving without meaning offense. "A burden is what we carry in our hearts. Rosa, the rest is company." The words came out without planning, but when she heard them, Rosa lowered her eyes and smiled softly. "It's been a long time since anyone called me company, sir." For a moment, silence was the only sound. Outside, a soft rain had returned, tapping gently on the roof. Samuel got up, placed another log on the fire, and stood watching the flames rise. The flickering light cast shadows on the floor. Shadows that seemed to move like old memories. The memory of Amina came on strong. He saw her face pale and sweating, begging for help. The day her labor went wrong, He felt the helplessness again, the despair, the guilt, and at the same time, he sensed something within him beginning to give way. Maybe because Rosa and Nala's presence filled that emptiness with a life that was simple but alive. Rosa noticed the faraway look in his eyes. "You seem to be thinking about someone." Samuel took a deep breath. "I'm thinking about the one who's gone. The house became too empty after she left." Rosa nodded slowly. "The pain never really goes away, sir. It just learns how to lie quieter inside us." Her words echoed strangely, as if the whole house had heard them. Samuel sat down again, and for a while they just listened to the rain and the crackle of wood. It was as if that conversation, without urgency, made of pauses and silences, was a kind of healing for them both. Soon after, Rosa fell asleep in the corner of the room, her body curled and her head resting on her arm. Samuel watched her. He thought about how the fragility of a woman could carry so much strength. That woman, even wounded, still managed to protect her daughter. Cook, be thankful and pray. He wondered when he had stopped believing in the simple faith of the righteous. The fire was starting to die, but Samuel didn't move. He stayed there, watching the mother and daughter sleep. He felt a knot tighten in his throat. For the first time in a long while, he didn't want the night to end. Not because he feared the next day, but because that house now had the sound of life, breath, warmth, presence. Before going to bed, he covered them both with a thicker blanket. He stood for a moment, watching the three shadows dancing on the wall. His Roses and Nalos, three solitudes that fate had brought together under one roof. When he lay down, sleep came quickly. Outside, the wind had already ceased. Inside the house, the silence wasn't empty. It was serene, and in Samuel's heart, something long dormant had begun to stir. A kind of timid hope that didn't yet dare to call itself love, but already had. Rosa's face and the smile of a little girl. The first ray of sunlight came through the window, slipping past the worn fabric of the curtain and landing on the Packareth floor. The house smelled of cold firewood and fresh coffee. Samuel had been up before dawn. He was used to waking early, but that morning felt different. A kind of lightness he hadn't felt in years. The birds singing in the yard mixed with the crackling of firewood on the stove, and the silence no longer seemed like an enemy. Rose awoke to the sound of clinking pans. It took her a moment to remember where she was. When she looked around, she saw Nala still asleep, wrapped in the blanket. The scene was peaceful, a peace that felt almost like a dream. She got up slowly, adjusted the scarf on her head, and looked toward the door. She thought about leaving quietly, as she had promised herself. "Just one night," she had said. But the smell of hot coffee and the sound of Samuel's hands stirring the spoon in the pot made her hesitate. He had his back turned when she approached. Rosa cleared her throat, nervous. "Mr. Samuel, thank you for everything. It's morning now, and we'll be on our way before we become a burden." Samuel didn't turn around right away. He kept stirring the pot and replied with a calm voice, "Eat first, then decide where you're going." Rosa stood still, unsure what to say. Those words had a gentle weight, like a disguised invitation. "I don't want to be a bother," she murmured. "If it were a bother, I wouldn't have lit the fire," he replied, still not looking. She smiled without meaning to. Sat at the table with Nala. The porridge was steaming and its sweet smell filled the house with life. Nala ate with enthusiasm, her joy impossible to hide. Samuel watched from a distance, pretending to be busy, but each of the girls' laughs pulled a piece of silence from his chest. After the meal, Rosa stood and began to clear the dishes. Samuel tried to stop her, but she insisted. "Let me, sir. I've always washed dishes in other people's homes. It's what I do best." He didn't argue. He just watched, thoughtful. There was something different about this woman, the way she moved her hands with care, as if every gesture held meaning. It was as if she were washing away pain along with the dishes. When she finished, Rosa picked up her worn bag and called to Nala, "Let's go, my girl." But when she looked outside, she saw the ground was still damp and the sky heavy with clouds. The cold wind brushed her face. She felt her body shiver, and for a moment courage failed her. Samuel noticed. "The road's still bad. Wait for the sun to come out." Rosa took a deep breath. "I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, sir." "Kindness isn't measured in days," he replied firmly. There was silence. Rosa sat back down, her gaze lost. Samuel poured more coffee, and for a few minutes, they just listened to the sound of the wind outside. Nala ran into the yard, laughing, and the sound of her laughter spilled into the house. Samuel watched her through the window, heart tight. That child reminded him of what he'd forgotten. The simple sound of life. Rosa, seeing his expression, said softly, "She has a way of making pain feel smaller." "Children have that gift," he replied. "They help us remember that time can be good again." The day moved on slowly. Rosa helped sweep the yard and hang up the clothes. Samuel repaired the fence. They worked in silence, but a light, companionable silence. When Thiessen began to set, he lit the oil lamp and served another plate of food. Nala, tired from playing, fell asleep early. Rosa looked around the house, her chest tightening. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Samuel. One day, when I have a place of my own, I want to repay all this. He looked at her calmly. You don't owe me anything. Sometimes what we give is just what the heart asks for. She had no response. She just lowered her head, moved. The lamp flame flickered between them, casting shadows on the walls as if time itself were listening in on the conversation. That night, Samuel took a long time to fall asleep. He listened to the soft sound of their breathing in the other room. It was a gentle sound, almost like a song. And for the first time in a long while, the widower realized that the house was no longer just a shelter for memories. It was a home again, still fragile, still quiet, but alive. The days began to string together without any of them really noticing. What was supposed to be just one night turned into a week, then another. Rosa was still there, helping however she could. And Samuel, though he never admitted it, had begun to expect her presence each morning. The house, once silent and gray, now smelled of warm food, soft voices, and the light laughter of a child running through the yard. Rosa was a simple woman, but there was an ancient wisdom in her, the kind that time doesn't erase. She mended torn clothes, patched up the curtain fabric, scrubbed the floor until the clay shone. When the sun went down, she lit the fire and sang to Nala until she fell asleep, an old song that spoke of hope and crossing over. Samuel from the other room would listen without meaning to interrupt. That voice brought back something he hadn't known he missed, the sound of tenderness. Nala, for her part, filled the house with movement. She chased after chickens, made dolls out of corn cobs, and talked to the flowers in the yard. Sometimes Samuel pretended not to see, but deep down he smiled. It was strange to see so much life in a place that had known only silence for so long. Rosa tried not to overstep the bounds of gratitude. She made a point of not seeming dependent, of showing she would leave as soon as she had the strength. But fate sometimes has other plans. One day while she was sweeping the yard, Samuel approached with a bucket of water and said, You don't have to do it all alone. Rosa, she replied without stopping. When I work, I forget the bad things. Samuel stayed quiet for a moment, then murmured, Then let me help. Forgetting is easier with someone else. Those words lingered in the air. Rosa looked at him with a quiet kind of surprise. The kind of look you give when you recognize kindness in someone who'd given up on offering it. That rough, quiet man was starting to show another side. Not the tired widower, but someone who still had humanity beneath the pain. The neighbors began to notice the change. Smoke once again rose daily from Samuel's chimney. The yard, once abandoned, now had laundry on the line and the scent of fresh soap. Some whispered. Others simply watched from a distance, trying to understand what connected that closed-off man and the woman with a painful past. One afternoon, Rosa appeared holding a piece of fabric. Found it in the old trunk, she said. I could make new curtains. Samuel looked at the fabric, his gaze lingering on her hands, steady and skilled. This house is yours too, Rosa, he replied without thinking. She froze. For a second, surprised. Don't say that, sir. We never know when fate will change course. He smiled slightly with a hint of melancholy. Sometimes fate only changes when we stop being afraid of it. Their life together began to feel natural, almost unnoticeable. Samuel started going out early to tend the field, returning with firewood and vegetables. Rosa made dinner, and Nala waited with the anticipation of someone waiting for a father. At the table, the three ate together, and the sound of spoons clinking in bowls was the sound of life finding its rhythm again. Sometimes on cold nights, Rosa would sit on the porch after putting Nala to bed. Samuel would join her in silence. They would just sit and look at the sky, the starlight reflecting in the darkness. My mother used to say, "Each star is a soul that's fulfilled its path," Rosa said one evening. Then Amina must be up there. Samuel replied quietly, making sure I don't get lost again. Rosa looked at him, moved. Maybe she sent me and Nala to remind you of that. Samuel didn't answer, but deep down he knew. Those words held a truth that hurt and healed at the same time. As the days went on, the house began to change. Not just on the outside, but from within. The cold felt less biting. Time passed more slowly. Samuel began to sleep better. Rosa started to smile more. It was as if, without realizing it, they were both being healed by the same remedy. Simple coexistence. The daily gesture. The warmth of what is human. And so, under the same roof, two broken fates began to stitch themselves back together. Not through haste, but through the quiet patience of life, which knows how to reunite what suffering once tore apart. Over time, What had once been silence became the sound of life, and what had been solitude turned into a shared routine. But in the village, where every glance carries a story, and every word travels faster than the wind, no one lives in peace for too long without becoming the subject of talk. It only took a few sunrises, and the daily smoke rising from Samuel's kitchen for the whispers to begin. At first, they came in the form of curiosity, disguised as innocent questions. "Who's that woman hanging around over there?" they asked at the general store. "A widow, maybe?" they speculated at the well. Then came the comments, the smirks, and the kinds of phrases born where envy sleeps. "They say old Samuel took a liking to the woman he took in, and she's got a little girl too, no less." The words eventually reached Rosa, carried by sideways glances and fake smiles. A neighbor, Donna Adelia, let it slip while buying flour. "It's nice to see Mr. Samuel back to life, isn't it? Only God knows what goes on when a man and a woman live under the same roof." Rosa listened in silence, heart tight. She thanked her and walked away without a word. But inside, shame and fear began to grow. That same night, after Nala had gone to sleep, Rosa sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the packed earth floor. She thought about how gratitude could at times turn into condemnation. She thought about the dignity she had fought so hard to preserve, now threatened by words she had never spoken. When Samuel appeared at the doorway holding the oil lamp, he noticed the unease on her face. "Is everything all right, Rosa?" She took a deep breath before answering. "No, sir. I think it's time for Nala and me to go." Samuel frowned. "Why did we do something to offend you?" "It's not you, sir. It's the people," she explained what she had heard. "The sharp tongues, the hidden laughs. I don't want them talking badly about you because of me. You have a name. You're respected. I don't want to tarnish that." Samuel listened in insolence. The lamp lit his tired face, but his gaze was steady. He walked to the middle of the room and after a moment said, "You know what? Shame is, Rosa. Shame is pretending you don't see someone else's pain. Shame is having a home and closing the door to those in need." Rosa tried to respond, but he continued, his voice calm, without anger. "I've lived long enough to know that the people's tongue is like the wind. It blows where it wants, without owner or brakes, but the wind passes. What remains is what we do while it's blowing." She lowered her eyes, moved. Samuel stepped closer. "Don't go because of them. Stay if your heart tells you it's right. Nala needs a roof, and I've grown used to hearing her voice in this house." Rosa took a deep breath. There was too much truth in that simple statement. "You're a good man, Samuel, but people don't understand kindness. They mistake it for weakness." "Let them," he replied. "God understands." Silence filled the room. Outside, the crickets sang and the wind rustled. The cashew tree leaves. Rosa stood still for a few seconds, then walked over to the fire and fed it with more wood. It was her way of saying she would stay, at least for a while longer. The next day, the whispers continued, but Samuel began walking through the village with his head held high. He greeted everyone with the same calm as always. Seeing his serenity, people began to doubt their own words. Rosa, for her part, carried on with the same steady heart, not because the gossip had stopped, but because she had learned something in that house. That the truth, when it's pure, doesn't need to defend itself. It simply remains. And so among the noise of voices and the weight of stares, the widower and the wronged woman continued sharing the same roof. The world could judge, but time, that silent judge, was already preparing the moment to show the difference between rumor and what is real. The sky began to change at dawn. The clouds, heavy and dense, had been gathering since the night before, and the air carried that scent of wet earth that comes before a storm. Samuel sensed the change even before the first thunder rumbled. "The weather won't show mercy today," he murmured, eyes on the darkening horizon. Rosa, washing clothes in the yard, looked up. "Looks like the sky is about to fall." Samuel gestured for her to come inside. "Best bring everything in and shut the windows. The wind's shifting." Nala ran back and forth, laughing, unaware of the adult's urgency. "Mama, listen to the thunder," she said, delighted by the noise. Rosa scooped her up and brought her inside. "Stay near the fire, my child. Thunder doesn't harm those who have faith." The following hours were filled with tension. The wind grew stronger, shaking the doors and making the roof tiles tremble. The fireplace struggled to stay lit, and the curtains whipped like flags. Samuel tried to secure the back window while Rosa gathered their few belongings in a corner. "This house is old, Samuel, and the wind is too strong," she shouted, barely heard over the storm. The tempest came in full. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder boomed as if it would shake the ground. The rain fell hard and furious against the roof. One of the windows broke loose, and Samuel rushed to secure it. The wind pushed against him, knocking him off balance and sending his arm crashing into the wall. Rosa ran to him, alarmed. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he replied, breathless, but the cut on his arm was bleeding. She tore a strip from her scarf and made a quick bandage. Sit down, please. Let me take care of this. Samuel hesitated, but obeyed. As she cleaned the wound, the sound of the rain was the only dialogue between them. Rosa breathed quickly, trying to hide her fear. Lord, don't let me lose anyone else, she murmured, not even realizing she'd said it aloud. Samuel looked at her with tenderness. You've lost a lot, haven't you? Everything I had, she replied. But we go on because stopping hurts more than moving forward. The wind howled again, knocking down one of the beams supporting the roof. Samuel got up to hold it in place. Rosa tried to help, but he insisted. Stay with the girl. I've got it here. The roof creaked. The house groaned under the weight of the water. With every thunderclap, Nala cried, and Rosa held her tight. It'll pass, my love. Storms always pass. Samuel fought the wind, his body tired, his arm throbbing. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't manage. Then he felt Rosa's hands beside his strong, steady, helping him brace the beam that threatened to fall. I told you to stay with the girl, he exclaimed, and leave you to get hurt again. No. If this house falls, it's falling on both of us. The words hung in the air, louder than the storm. The two of them locked eyes for a brief moment, and in that glance was something beyond words, shared struggle, courage, and the silent certainty that their fates were now one. After hours of battle, the storm began to weaken. The wind calmed, the rain softened, and the sky, still gray, began to show signs of fatigue. Samuel collapsed onto a bench. Exhausted, Rosa helped him lie down and wiped his face with a towel. Close your eyes for a while. I'll keep watch. The night passed slowly. Rosa stayed by his side, tending the fire, caring for his wound, murmuring quiet prayers between breaths. Nala slept curled up in a corner, unaware of the storm's fury. When daylight broke, the house was still standing solid, as if the invisible, love-taking root inside had held each wall in place. Rosa looked at Samuel sleeping and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the peace of those who conquer, but the peace of those who endure together. Outside, the ground was still wet and the air heavy with rain. But inside that house, for the first time, fear had turned into shelter. As the timid sun began to break through the clouds, Rosa understood that not every storm comes to destroy. Some komedo bring together what time once pulled apart. The sun reappeared timidly the next day, and the village woke up to the smell of washed earth. The silence after the storm felt almost sacred, as if the world was breathing in relief. Inside the house, the fire in the hearth still burned low, and Samuel slept deeply, his arm bandaged with the cloth Rosa had used during the night. Rosa, her eyes tired, watched him. His face looked more peaceful, lighter somehow. She stood carefully so as not to wake him, and walked to the window. The yard was covered in branches and leaves, but the house had held. The wind had taken part of the chicken coop's roof, but the main shelter remained strong. Rosa looked to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." The house stood, and so did he. Samuel stirred at the sound of her voice. "Who were you talking to?" he asked, still groggy. "With God," Rosa replied, smiling gently. "He heard our prayers." Samuel slowly sat up, supporting his injured arm. "It's been a long time since I talked to him, but he never stopped listening. Samuel, he was just waiting for you to speak again." Her words lingered between them, like the scent of fresh coffee Rosa was preparing. There was tenderness in her tone, a simple, steady faith that Samuel had long forgotten how to feel. They sat at the table. Rosa poured the coffee, and the sound of it filling the cups brought a strange calm to the room. For a while, they just watched the steam rise until Samuel broke the silence. "Rosa, last night when the wind nearly took everything, I thought it was the end. And for a moment I felt it would have been fair. I've lived long enough." Rosa looked at him attentively, sensing there was something behind his words. He lowered his eyes, and his voice came softer, more fragile. "I've never told anyone this, not even the priest. But maybe I need to say it before time silences me for good." She set her cup down and waited. Samuel took a deep breath. "My wife Amina died 3 years ago. She was pregnant with our first child. It was a night like that one, full of thunder and wind. I ran to get the midwife, but she took too long. When he came back, it was too late. I held her hand until the end, but I couldn't do anything. The village blamed me, said I hadn't done enough, that it was God's punishment. And I believed them." Rosa said nothing. She just let the silence embrace his pain. Samuel went on. "Since then, I shut everything down. The house, my heart. I thought if I never let anyone in again, I'd never lose anything again. But when you two arrived that night, I realized the heart doesn't listen to fear. You brought back the sound of life. You brought back what death had taken." The words came out with difficulty, like they'd been trapped for years. Rosa felt her eyes well up. "Samuel, pain doesn't go away, but it can learn to be lighter. And when we share sorrow, it hurts less. He looked into her eyes. I thought I'd never have space in here again, he said, lightly touching his chest. But you and that little girl brought warmth back to this house. And in a way, Amina is still here too. Because what she taught me was this. Caring is the purest form of love. Rosa wiped her tears, trying to keep her emotions in check. Amina must have been a good woman. She was, and I think she'd approve of what's happening here. They smiled shilly like those sharing a secret. Outside, Nala ran after the chickens, laughing, and the sound of the child seemed to confirm what they both felt, but hadn't said aloud. The day went on quietly, and for the first time, the silence that filled that house wasn't one of mourning. It was peace. Samuel spent the afternoon sitting on the porch, watching Rosa Sue and Nala play. He felt light, as if he'd finally handed over the burden of years to someone who knew how to carry it with gentleness. When night came, Rosa set dinner on the table. Samuel ate slowly, deep in thought, and before going to bed, he said in a low voice, "Thank you, Rosa, for not leaving." She replied without looking at him, "We didn't abandon those who are already wounded. God doesn't do that with us, and I wouldn't either." And so, between the crackling of the fire and the smell of warm food, the pain that had inhabited that house for so long finally began to give way to forgiveness. A quiet forgiveness, born not of words, but of presence. The purest form of healing there is. The days that followed were different. The sun seemed to rise more gently over the village, and even the birdsong sounded clearer. Rose attended the house as if it had always been hers, and Samuel carried a different expression. The wound on his arm was almost healed, but what had truly begun to heal was something much deeper. His soul. The neighbors, however, kept talking. The tongue of the people doesn't fall silent with time. It simply changes its tone. Now they said Rosa had gotten lucky and that Samuel was under some spell. Some laughed, others scoffed, and a few in quiet reflection began to admire the peaceful life they were building. Rosa heard the murmurs from a distance, but no longer let them weigh her down. Samuel kept his routine like someone who knows the truth will always speak for itself in time. It was on a Sunday morning during Mass at the village's small church that Fata decided to speak. The priest, an elderly man with a gentle voice, was preaching about the value of welcoming others and selfless love. Rosa sat quietly, Nala on her lap. Samuel arrived a little later discreetly as he always did. When Mass ended, the square began to fill. Men talking about crops, women exchanging recipes, children running and playing. Then Samuel, holding his hat in one hand and wearing a resolute look, walked to the center of the square. Rosa noticed the movement and grew tense. The people, curious, began to draw closer. The wind rustled the mango tree leaves, and a sudden hush fell over the space. Samuel cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice firm but calm. "I've never been one to explain myself. Those who know me know I've always preferred silence. But there are moments when silence becomes injustice, and I won't be part of that anymore." All eyes turned to him. Rosa lowered her head, heart pounding. Nala held her hand. Samuel continued, "Years ago, this woman and this child arrived at my door on a rainy night. They asked for shelter, and I opened my home. Since then, they've been a blessing, not a burden. Rosa didn't take anything from me. She brought back what I had lost, peace. And this little girl, Nala, brought back the laughter that death had taken." The crowd murmured, surprised by his boldness. Samuel lifted his head and said loudly, without hesitation, "So let it be known. This woman and this child no longer need to ask for shelter. This is their home now, too. And anyone who wants to judge, let them first look at their own rooftop." The silence that followed was absolute. The priest, still standing at the church doors, made the sign of the cross. Some women exchanged glances, others wept quietly. The older men nodded solemnly with respect. Rosa remained still, unable to move, eyes brimming with tears, hands trembling. She slowly approached him and whispered, "Samuel, you didn't have to do that in front of everyone." "I did," he replied, "because when kindness is true, it should never be hidden." Nala hugged Samuel's legs and laughed, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing the affection that filled the air. The crowd slowly dispersed, some murmuring words of approval, others quietly reflecting. From that day on, none dared speak of Rosa with scorn. What had once been gossip became example. They said the widower hour from the hill had found a new reason to live, and the wronged woman, once rejected by the town, was now seen as a symbol of faith and courage. That afternoon, back at home, Rosa sat on the porch, her heart still racing. "Aren't you afraid of what people will say now?" she asked. Samuel answered calmly. "Those who spend life worrying about what others think forget to see what God is showing them." Rosa smiled, and her eyes shone like someone who was seeing for the first time the right path ahead. Nala played in the yard, and the sound of her laughter seemed to seal that decision with joy. The sun sank slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in orange and gold. Samuel watched the scene in silence and thought of a no sadness. The rain had long stopped, but the scent of wet earth still lingered in the air. The kind that reminds you life always finds a way to bloom again. In that quiet evening, while the leaves whispered secrets to the wind, widower Samuel sat still, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: gratitude. Because somehow, even in all its harshness, life still knew how to reward the hearts that stayed kind. And in that moment, Samuel understood. What he had done wasn't charity, it was love. And love, when born from goodness, is the most silent and perfect form of justice. The next morning, the sun rose lazily over the soaked hills, spilling golden light across the village roofs. Samuel's home, once a hollow shell of memories, now seemed alive, breathing again. The air inside was lighter, almost joyful. The silence that used to ache now carried laughter. The smell of fresh coffee, and the sweet scent of flowers Rosa had planted by the window. Nala's giggles echoed through the small rooms as she chased a thin, scrappy cat that had shown up after the storm, the one she'd proudly named Hope. The name fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for that very season. On the porch, Samuel sat sharpening his old farm knife, his hands steady, his mind calm. He looked at the yard, and for the first time in a long while, he felt peace instead of emptiness. Inside, Rosa hummed softly as she stirred the porridge, the sound of her voice blending with the smell of breakfast. When she stepped out, the morning light caught her hair, and she smiled. "Breakfast is ready, Samuel," she called. He rose slowly, wiping his hands on a worn cloth, and as he stepped inside, the light revealed something new in him. Not a man without pain, but one no longer ruled by it. They sat together, the three of them. Rosa noticed how he ate slowly, not out of habit, but out of gratitude. Like someone savoring not just the food, but the company. Nala talked endlessly about Hope the cat, the flowers, and the puddles outside. Samuel listened, smiling and laughing, his laughter rich and steady, like a sound returning from a long-lost corner of his soul. "How long has it been since you laughed like that?" Rosa teased. Samuel smiled. "Since the world went silent," he said. "But it seems the world has found its voice again." Rosa's eyes softened. "Sometimes," she replied, "the world just goes quiet, to see if we still have the courage to listen." The afternoon drifted by gently. The yard, still damp, warmed under the sun. Samuel fixed the chicken coop, while Rosa sewed beneath the mango tree. Nala played nearby, collecting twigs and stones. The peace among them felt real, solid, as if life had finally found its proper rhythm. Neighbors passing on the road waved with warm smiles. Their gazes were no longer full of gossip, but respect. The villagers whispered now with admiration, saying, "The widower's house looks alive again. It's like a whole new place." Weeks passed, and the change grew deeper. Rosa's sewing became known in the village. Women began bringing her clothes to mend. Samuel started selling wood again and repairing tools for neighbors. Money was still tight, but the house never felt poor. On nights when the moon hung bright and round, Rosa would sit on the porch, braiding Nala's hair. Samuel would join them quietly, and for a while they'd just watch the stars. One evening, Rosa whispered, "I never thought I'd have a home again." Samuel smiled faintly, "And I never thought this house would have a soul again." She looked at him, her voice gentle. "Doesn't it bother you, sharing your space with two strangers?" He turned to her and said, "You stopped being strangers the day fate brought you to my door." The wind sighed through the mango leaves. Nala fell asleep in her mother's lap, and Rosa looked at Samuel's face glowing in the moonlight. Her heart swelled with quiet warmth. In that stillness, she understood. Life was beginning again, not as it was, but as it was meant to be. Slower, truer, kinder. Days turned into weeks, and their home became a refuge. Travelers, neighbors, and lost souls all found welcome there. Water, rest, and kindness were given freely. People began to call it the House of Hope. Time, the invisible weaver, stitched their lives together. Samuel never slept alone again. Rosa never had to beg for shelter, and Nala grew up surrounded by love, calling the old widower Dad, because the heart, unlike blood, always knows where it belongs. In that clay house nestled between the hills, life was reborn. What began as a desperate plea on a rainy night had become a home where love and gratitude lived side by side. Because when fate decides to unite weary souls, it never loses its way. It only waits for the right moment to open the door. The years slipped by quietly, leaving marks time could not erase. Samuel's home became the living heart of the village. The roof that once trembled under storms now echoed with laughter, the smell of baking bread, and the chatter of guests. Nala grew into a graceful young woman with her mother's smile and Samuel's calm eyes. She still called him father, and he wore the title like an honor. Every Sunday they walked to church together, Rosa carrying flowers, Samuel standing quietly in the back, hat in hand, eyes glistening. Rosa became known not just for her sewing, but for her heart. She stitched torn clothes, yes, but also mended broken spirits. Women came from far-off villages seeking her wisdom. "Pain taught me tenderness," she'd tell them, "and those who open their doors from kindness never live in loneliness again." The villagers, once so full of judgment, learned more from her life than any sermon could teach. Samuel's name, once spoken with pity, became a symbol of generosity. Rosa was called the Lady of the Shelter. It was said that if anyone knocked on her door, she never asked who they were. She simply set another plate at the table. Years later, one soft afternoon, Samuel sat watching the sunset. His hair had turned white, his hands trembled slightly, but his heart was full. Nala, now grown, tended the flowers. Rosa sat nearby, sewing as always. The golden light wrapped around them like a blessing. Samuel whispered, "You know, Rosa, sometimes I think life is like a long rain. You get soaked, you feel cold, but when it's over, the air is clearer." Rosa smiled without looking up. "And even drenched," she said softly, "the ground always blooms again." Their words floated into the warm air, simple and true. Samuel felt no regret, no sadness, only peace. When night came, they lit the lamp and sat at the table, the three of them as always. Nala's laughter mingled with the crackle of the fire. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of flowers. They say that after those days, Samuel's home became a haven for the lost. Mothers with children, old men without families, all finding warmth there. People would whisper, "At the house on the hill, no one sleeps in the rain." And though years have passed, the memory of that story still lingers. When rain falls softly over the village, someone always repeats the saying born from that night. It was on a rainy night that the widower learned to love again. And those who hear it understand. Not every miracle falls from the sky. Some come knocking at your door, tired, soaked, carrying a child, asking only for shelter for one night. Because when fate decides to unite weary souls, it never loses its way. It only waits for the right time to open the door.